The ship was old. Its walls carried the scars of 100 battles, and its corridors smelled like burnt metal and recycled air. The pale dusk had seen better days, but it still flew, and that was enough. Deep inside the belly of the warship, in a room where the lights flickered every few minutes, a group of young cadets sat on the cold floor in a half-circle. They were Veloxi, tall, thin creatures with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that blinked in pairs. They were fresh out of training. None of them had ever seen real combat. None of them had ever watched a friend die, and none of them had ever met a human. Vrelith sat across from them on an old metal crate. He was not like the cadets. He was old. His skin had turned from blue to gray a long time ago. One of his 4 eyes was blind, covered by a deep scar that ran from his forehead down to his jaw. His left arm was a mechanical replacement. The original had been taken from him many years ago, on a planet he still saw in his nightmares. He had served the Confederacy for 42 cycles. He had fought against the Dranari, the Moktal, and the Shivreen. He had survived things that most soldiers never even heard about. But when the cadets asked him to tell them about the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced, he did not mention any of those species. He was quiet for a long time. The cadets shifted on the floor. Some of them looked at each other nervously. One of them, a young female named Kirath, finally spoke up. She asked if he was all right. Vrelith looked at her with his 3 good eyes and let out a long, slow breath through the slits on the side of his neck. He told them he was going to tell them about the humans. The room went still. Every cadet knew the name, humans. They had heard the stories in whispers during training, stories that most instructors refused to confirm or deny. Stories about a species from a small, unremarkable planet on the edge of the galaxy. A species that should have been easy to conquer. A species that was soft, short-lived, and had no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armor, no telepathy, and yet a species that had made the entire Confederacy stop and reconsider what it meant to go to war. Vrelith told them the stories were true, all of them, and some of them were worse than what the cadets had heard. He began with Korath Prime. It was a mining world on the border between Confederacy space and human-controlled territory. The planet was rich in varium, a mineral used to power faster-than-light engines. The Confederacy wanted it. The humans wanted it too. For a while, both sides danced around each other. Diplomats talked. Messages were sent. But in the end, the Confederacy High Command decided that a small human colony on the planet's surface would not be a problem. They sent Vrelith and his battalion to take the planet. He remembered arriving in orbit. His fleet had 12 warships. The humans had 2 small patrol vessels and a cargo hauler that had been fitted with weapons that looked like they were held together with metal wire and hope. Vrelith had laughed when he saw it. His second-in-command, a seasoned officer named Torath, had laughed too. They expected the humans to run. Any rational species would have looked at the numbers and retreated. The Dranari would have pulled back. The Moktal would have surrendered and tried to negotiate. Even the Shivreen, who were known for their stubbornness, would have at least called for reinforcements before engaging. The humans did not run. The 2 patrol vessels flew straight at the Confederacy fleet. They moved fast and unpredictable, weaving between the larger ships in patterns that the targeting systems could not track. The cargo hauler positioned itself between the fleet and the planet, absorbing hit after hit, while the colony below prepared its ground defenses. Vrelith gave the order to destroy all 3 ships. His fleet fired everything they had. They hit the cargo hauler 16 times before it finally broke apart. But the 2 patrol vessels kept flying. One of them rammed directly into the side of a Confederacy cruiser and detonated its own engine core. The explosion took out the cruiser and damaged 2 ships nearby. Vrelith remembered standing on the bridge of his command ship, watching the fireballs spread across the blackness of space. He remembered the silence on the bridge. No one spoke. No one could understand what had just happened. A ship had deliberately destroyed itself to take out an enemy. The pilot had chosen death, not because there was no other option, but because it would cause the most damage. Toraf had whispered that the pilot must have been a machine, an unmanned drone. Vralith checked the scans. The ship had carried a crew of 3, all human, all alive, until the moment of impact. The second patrol vessel was eventually brought down, but not before it had destroyed 2 more Confederacy fighters, and knocked out the communications array on Vralith's own ship. When it finally fell, burning and broken, it crashed into the planet's surface near the human colony. Vralith assumed the pilot was dead. He was wrong. The ground assault began 6 hours later. Vralith sent 3,000 soldiers to the surface. They landed in a wide valley surrounded by rocky hills. The human colony was small, maybe 500 people in total. Scans showed that fewer than 80 of them were military. The rest were miners, engineers, doctors, and families. Vralith expected a quick surrender. He broadcast a message offering safe passage off the planet. He gave them 1 hour to respond. The response came in 43 minutes. It was a short audio message. A calm voice, a human male, identified himself as Captain Dohyun. He thanked Vralith for the offer. Then, he politely declined. He said that the people of the colony had voted. They would stay, they would fight, and he wished Vralith good luck. Vralith played the message twice because he thought there had been a translation error. There was not. 500 humans, most of them civilians, had looked at an army of 3,000 alien soldiers and chosen to fight. Kirith raised her hand and asked Vralith why they did not just leave. Vralith looked at her and said that was the first question every Confederacy officer asked about humans, and it was the question that none of them ever found a satisfying answer to. He told the cadets to get comfortable. The story was just beginning, and it was going to get much worse. Vralith leaned forward on the metal crate and rested his mechanical arm on his knee. The joints clicked softly. He told the cadets that what happened next on Korath Prime changed the way the Confederacy thought about war forever. The ground assault began at dawn, local time. Vralith had ordered his soldiers to advance from 3 directions, moving through the valley toward the colony in a standard encirclement formation. It was a textbook approach. Overwhelming numbers, superior firepower. The operation was supposed to last 4 hours. The planners had even scheduled a supply drop for the afternoon, assuming the fighting would be over by then and the troops would need food and water while they secured the mining equipment. It did not last 4 hours. It lasted 3 days. The humans had used the time between the orbital battle and the ground assault to prepare. They had dug trenches in the rocky soil. They had placed explosive charges along the valley's narrow paths. They had turned the mining tunnels beneath the colony into a network of hidden passages that connected to dozens of exit points spread across the hills. The colony itself had been reinforced with thick plates of mining-grade metal, welded to every wall, every door, every window. The buildings were no longer homes. They were bunkers. Captain Dohyun had organized the defenders into small teams of 5 or 6. Each team had a specific area to hold. They moved through the tunnels, appeared behind Vralith's soldiers, fired, and then vanished back underground before anyone could return fire. The Confederacy troops were trained for open-field combat and large-scale engagements. They were not trained for this. The humans hit them from every angle, at every hour, in every way that the Confederacy soldiers did not expect. Vralith lost 200 soldiers in the first 6 hours, not to a single decisive engagement. He lost them in small numbers, 5 here, 3 there, 8 in a tunnel collapse, 12 in an ambush near the eastern ridge. Each loss was small on its own. Together, they were devastating, and they never stopped. But what disturbed Vralith the most was not the tactics. It was the endurance. Veloxi soldiers could fight effectively for about 10 hours before they needed sleep. Their bodies required it. Without rest, their reaction times slowed, their 4 eyes lost focus, and their decision-making collapsed. After 16 hours without sleep, a Veloxi soldier was essentially useless. This was true for most species in the Confederacy. The Drenari lasted about 14 hours. The Moktal could push to 18 if they used stimulants. The biological limits were well known, and every military strategy in the Confederacy was built around them. The humans did not seem to have the same limits. Captain Do-Yoon's soldiers fought without stopping. Vrayalith's intelligence officers monitored their movements through the tunnels. The same individuals appeared again and again, fighting, retreating, repositioning, fighting again. After 20 hours, the Confederacy command staff assumed the humans would collapse. They did not. After 30 hours, Torath suggested that the humans were rotating in fresh troops from some hidden reserve. Vrayalith checked the scans. There were no reserves. The same 80 soldiers had been fighting without sleep for over a day. At the 40-hour mark, Vrayalith received a field report that made him put down his command tablet and stare at the wall for a long time. The report was about a human medic. She had been identified early in the fighting as a high-value target because she was keeping the wounded humans alive and sending them back into combat. Vrayalith's snipers had been ordered to take her out. They had shot her twice, once in the left shoulder, once in the side, just below her ribs. Both shots had been confirmed hits. Both should have been enough to take her out of the fight. Unji had treated her own wounds. She had used a small medical kit to stop the bleeding, stitched the wound on her side with one hand while crouching behind a rock, and then continued moving. She kept treating other wounded soldiers. She kept dragging them to safety. She kept sending them back into the fight. For 3 days she did not stop. She did not sleep. She did not die. Vrayalith told the cadets that he had studied the biology of humans after the battle. He learned that humans could push their bodies far beyond safe limits through something they called adrenaline and willpower. Their bodies would scream at them to stop. Their muscles would tear. Their organs would begin to fail. And they would keep going. Not because they could not feel the pain. They felt all of it. They simply chose to ignore it. One of the cadets, a young male named Brenneth, asked how that was possible. He said that pain existed to protect a body. To ignore it was to invite death. Vrayalith nodded slowly and said that was exactly what made humans so terrifying. They were willing to invite death if it meant winning, or even if it just meant not losing. On the second day, Vrayalith ordered a full armored push through the center of the valley. He sent his heaviest vehicles and his best shock troops. They advanced in a tight column, shields overlapping, weapons firing in controlled bursts. For the first time, the humans could not use their tunnel tactics. The column was too wide and too well protected. It pushed through the outer defenses and reached the edge of the colony. And then the column stopped. Not because of enemy fire, not because of a mechanical failure. It stopped because of Lieutenant Sujin. She walked out of the colony alone. She stood in the middle of the path, directly in front of the lead vehicle. She was not armed. She was not wearing armor. She was a small human woman standing in front of a machine that weighed more than 40 tons. The vehicle commander ordered her to move. She did not move. He ordered the column to advance slowly, expecting her to step aside. She did not step aside. The vehicle inched forward until it was less than a meter from her body. And still, she did not move. The column sat there for 11 minutes. 11 minutes in which it did not advance. 11 minutes in which the other human soldiers used the tunnels to reposition. 11 minutes in which explosive charges were placed beneath the path behind the column. 11 minutes that Sujin gave her people by standing in front of a machine that could have killed her with a tap. When the charges went off, the rear of the column was destroyed. The vehicles could not reverse, and the tunnel fighters hit them from both sides. Vrelith lost 400 soldiers in that single engagement. And when the dust settled, he saw Sujin walking calmly back into the colony. She had not been touched. Not because the vehicle commander had shown mercy, but because he had hesitated. He had not been able to understand why a living being would stand in front of certain death and refuse to move. The hesitation had cost him everything. Vrelith paused his story. The cadets were silent. Some of them had stopped blinking, which for a Veloxi was a sign of deep shock. He told them that the third day was the worst, but he needed a moment before he could talk about it. Even after all these years, the memory was not easy to carry. He looked down at his mechanical arm and flexed the metal fingers slowly. The cadets understood. Vrelith took a long breath and continued. He told the cadets that on the third day of the battle, he learned something about humans that no training manual, no intelligence report, and no war simulation had ever prepared him for. He learned about their loyalty. In the Confederacy, loyalty was understood as a practical thing. Soldiers followed orders because the system worked. Officers earned respect through results. If a soldier fell in battle, the unit noted the loss and adjusted its formation. There were rituals afterward, memorials, honors, records updated. But during the fight, a fallen soldier was a fallen soldier. Resources were not wasted on the dead or the dying when the living still needed them. It was logical. It was efficient. Every species in the Confederacy understood this. You did not subtract from your strength to recover what was already lost. Humans did not do math the same way. On the morning of the third day, the Confederacy forces launched a concentrated assault on the northern section of the colony. A squad of Vrelith's best soldiers managed to break through a weak point in the human defenses and pushed into a large storage building that the humans had been using as a field hospital. The fighting inside was brutal and close. Walls were torn apart. Explosions shook the ceiling. Dust filled the air so thick that even the Veloxi thermal sensors struggled to pick out targets. During the chaos, a section of the building's upper floor collapsed. It came down in a roar of metal and stone, crushing everything beneath it. When the dust settled, the Confederacy soldiers secured the area and began pulling back to regroup. The northern section was effectively destroyed. The human fighters who had been defending it were either dead or had retreated into the tunnels. But then something happened that Vrelith said he would remember until the last day of his life. A human sergeant named Teho had been leading the defense in that section. He had pulled his team out through a tunnel exit on the eastern side when the collapse began. He was safe. His surviving team members were safe. By every reasonable measure, his job was done. He could have fallen back to the main colony and reinforced Captain Dohun's position. That was what any logical soldier would have done. Instead, Teho stopped at the tunnel exit. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, covered in dust and blood. Then he turned around and went back in. One of his team members, a young woman named Yuna, had not made it out. She had been near the collapse zone when the ceiling came down. The last anyone had seen of her, she was pinned under a beam on the upper floor. Her vital signs on the team's medical tracker had flatlined 8 minutes earlier. She was dead. Teho knew she was dead. His team told him she was dead. The medical tracker confirmed it. He went back anyway. Vrelith's soldiers were still in the building when Teho came back through the dust. They detected him on thermal and assumed it was a counterattack. A squad of 6 moved to intercept him. They found him on the upper floor, alone, digging through the rubble with his bare hands. His gloves were torn. His fingers were bleeding. He was pulling chunks of concrete and twisted metal aside, piece by piece, trying to reach Yuna's body. The squad leader ordered Teho to surrender. Teho did not respond. He did not even look at them. He kept digging. The squad leader repeated the order. Teho ignored him again. He pulled a metal beam aside, a beam that must have weighed more than his own body, and kept going. The squad leader was confused. He reported to Vrelith that the human appeared to be unarmed and was not engaging. He asked for instructions. Vrelith, watching through the squad leader's helmet camera, told them to hold position and observe. He wanted to understand what was happening. For 23 minutes, Teho dug through the rubble, while 6 armed Confederacy soldiers stood in a circle around him and watched. None of them fired. None of them moved. They were paralyzed by something they had never encountered before. They could not understand why this human was doing what he was doing. The person he was trying to reach was dead. There was no tactical value in recovering a body during active combat. The risk was enormous. The reward was nothing. And yet this human was tearing his hands apart to reach her. When Teho finally uncovered Yuna's body, he sat down on the rubble beside her. He was exhausted. His hands were ruined, skin torn off, bones possibly broken. He checked her pulse, even though the tracker had already told him the truth. Then he picked her up. He lifted her body onto his shoulders and stood up slowly, his legs shaking under the weight. He looked at the Confederacy soldiers. For the first time, he made eye contact. He did not speak. He did not raise a weapon. He just looked at them with an expression that Vrelith later described to the Confederacy High Command as the most unsettling thing he had ever seen on a living face. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something deeper and older than both. It was a look that said, this person belonged to him, and he was taking her home, and nothing in the universe was going to stop him. The squad leader stepped aside. He did not give an order. He did not consult command. He simply moved out of the way, and his soldiers followed. Teho walked past them, carrying Yuna's body over his shoulders. He walked down the broken stairs, through the destroyed hallway, and out into the open ground. He walked across 50 meters of exposed terrain, where any sniper could have ended him. No one fired. He carried her all the way back to the main colony. When he arrived, Captain Dohyun met him at the entrance. Dohyun did not say anything. He helped Teho set Yuna down gently on a clean surface inside. Then Dohyun put his hand on Teho's shoulder and held it there for a long moment. That was all. No speeches, no ceremony. Just one human telling another that what he did mattered. Vrelith watched all of this from orbit. He watched it on a screen in his command center, surrounded by officers and strategists who had spent their entire careers studying war. None of them spoke. The room was so quiet that you could hear the hum of the ship's engines 3 decks below. Torath, who had been standing beside Vrelith the entire time, he said that he had been wrong about the humans. He had called them primitive. He had called them irrational. He had said they were too emotional to be a real threat. But what he had just seen was not weakness. He did not know what it was, but it was not weakness. Vrelith agreed. He told the cadets that in that moment, watching a wounded man carry his dead friend through a war zone, while an entire army stood still and let him pass, he understood something terrible. The humans were not fighting for territory. They were not fighting for minerals. They were not fighting for strategic advantage. They were fighting for each other. Every single one of them was willing to die not for a cause, not for a flag, not for a government, but for the person standing next to them. And an army like that, Vrelith said quietly, does not break. You can hurt it. You can push it back. You can kill every single soldier in it, because the thing that holds it together is not something you can destroy with weapons. Kirath asked what happened to Teho. Vrelith said he survived the battle. His hands healed, though they were never the same. He stayed in the military. The last Vrelith heard, Teho had become an instructor at a human military academy, where he taught young soldiers one simple lesson: you never leave anyone behind. Not the living, not the dead, not ever. The cadets sat in heavy silence. Vrelith let them sit with it. Some lessons needed silence to sink in properly. Vrelith rubbed his blind eye with the back of his good hand. It was a habit he had developed years ago, something he did when his mind was somewhere far away. The cadets noticed, but said nothing. They had learned in the last hour that Vrelith would speak when he was ready, and not a moment before. He told them that by the evening of the third day, the battle should have been over. By every calculation, by every model, by every historical comparison the Confederacy had in its records, the humans should have been finished. They had started with 80 soldiers and roughly 400 civilians. After 3 days of constant fighting, nearly a third of their soldiers were dead or too wounded to fight. Their ammunition was running low. Their makeshift fortifications were crumbling. The mining tunnels had been partially collapsed by Confederacy charges. The field hospital had been destroyed in the northern assault. Vrelith's forces had taken heavy losses too, over 700 dead, which was a number that would have ended most campaigns against most species. But he still had more than 2,000 soldiers on the ground, backed by armored vehicles and orbital support. The math was simple. The humans could not win. Vrelith gave the order to prepare for a final assault at dawn the next morning. He planned to hit the colony from all sides at once with everything he had. There would be no more cautious advances, no more probing attacks, just overwhelming force applied all at once. He expected the humans to either surrender before it began or be completely destroyed within the first hour. That night, something strange happened. The fighting stopped. Not slowly, not gradually, it just stopped. The human ambushes that had been constant for 3 days suddenly ceased. No shots were fired. No explosions echoed across the valley. For the first time since the battle had begun, Korath Prime was quiet. Vrelith's officers were nervous. Silence from humans was more frightening than noise. They ran scans of the colony and the surrounding area. The humans were still there. All of them, soldiers, civilians, everyone, had gathered in the center of the colony, in a large open area that had once been a community space. They were sitting together. Some were standing. Some were lying down with bandages covering most of their bodies. The scans showed no weapons being prepared, no defensive positions being reinforced, no traps being set. They were just sitting there, together. Torath suggested it was a surrender gathering. Vrelith considered it, but something told him it was not. He ordered a surveillance drone to fly low over the colony for a closer look. The drone's cameras sent back images that Vrelith would carry with him for the rest of his life. The humans were eating. Someone had cooked a meal, a real meal, not military rations. Vrelith could see steam rising from pots set up in the middle of the open area. People were sitting in small groups, sharing food, passing bowls to each other. Children were there too, sitting in the laps of adults. Some of the wounded soldiers were propped up against walls, holding plates that others had brought to them. Unji, the medic who had been shot twice and had not stopped moving for 3 days, was sitting cross-legged on the ground with a bowl in her hands, eating slowly. They were having dinner. On the night before what would almost certainly be their last battle, the humans were having dinner together. Vrelith zoomed the drone cameras in closer. He saw Captain Dohyun walking among the groups, stopping at each one. He would crouch down, say something, and the people would nod or smile or sometimes laugh. He moved like a man visiting family, not like a commander preparing for a final stand. When he reached the group of wounded soldiers, he sat down with them and stayed for a long time. He ate with them. He listened to them. And then Vrelith saw something that confused him even more. Lieutenant Sujin was standing apart from the others, near the edge of the gathering. She was leaning against a metal wall, looking up at the sky. She was not eating. She was not talking to anyone. She was singing. The drone's audio sensors picked it up. A soft, slow melody in a human language that the translator could not fully process. The words did not matter. The sound itself was enough. It was quiet and sad and steady, and it carried across the open area like a thread holding everything together. No one told her to stop. No one joined in. Some of them closed their eyes and listened. Some of them kept eating. One of the children fell asleep against her mother's chest while the song drifted over them. Vrelith muted the audio feed. He could not listen to it anymore. He told the cadets that the sound had done something to him that he could not explain. He was a soldier. He had heard screams and explosions and the terrible silence of a battlefield after the fighting ends. None of those sounds had affected him the way that quiet song did. It was the sound of people who knew they were going to die and had decided to spend their last night being human. He turned off the drone feed and went to his quarters. He did not sleep. At dawn, the final assault began. Vrelith gave the command from orbit. 2,000 soldiers advanced on the colony from every direction. Armored vehicles rolled across the valley floor. Overhead, gunships provided air support. The ground shook with the movement of the army. The colony was quiet as they approached. Vrelith's lead units reached the outer walls without resistance. For a brief moment, a fragile hope formed in Vrelith's mind that the humans had changed their minds, that they had decided to surrender after all, that the meal last night had been a farewell, and they would come out with their hands up. Then Do-hyun's voice crackled over an open communication channel. He was broadcasting on all frequencies. Every Confederacy soldier on the ground and every officer in orbit heard him at the same time. His voice was calm and clear. He said good morning. He said he hoped the Confederacy soldiers had slept well. He said his people had enjoyed a wonderful meal last night, and that the cook, a miner named Hajin, wanted everyone to know that the stew had been his grandmother's recipe, and he was very proud of how it turned out. Then Do-hyun's voice changed, harder. He said that his people had made their decision. Every single one of them. Soldiers and civilians, men and women, the old and the young. They were not leaving. This was their home. They had built it with their hands. They had raised their children here. They had buried their dead in this soil, and they would defend it until there was no one left to hold a weapon. Then the channel went silent for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. And then the humans charged. They came out of every door, every tunnel exit, every hole in every wall. They came screaming, not in fear, not in panic. They screamed the way a storm screams, wild, enormous, unstoppable. Soldiers with guns ran alongside miners with tools. Unji was there, bandaged and bleeding and carrying a weapon in one hand and a medical kit in the other. Taeho was there, his damaged hands wrapped in cloth, running at the front. Sujin was there, no longer singing, her face set in an expression of absolute and terrifying calm. And at the center of them all was Do-hyun, leading the charge with nothing but a sidearm and his voice, calling out orders that his people followed without hesitation. The Confederacy lines buckled, not because the humans had superior weapons, not because they had better tactics. The lines buckled because the soldiers holding them had never seen anything like this. They had never faced an enemy that ran toward death with its mouth open and its eyes burning. The sheer force of will behind that charge was something that no training could prepare a soldier for. Vrelith watched from orbit as his carefully planned assault dissolved into chaos. He watched his soldiers, trained, equipped, outnumbering the enemy by more than 4 to 1, fall back. They simply moved away from the humans, the way water moves away from a hot stone. The battle lasted 6 more hours, and when it was over, nothing was the same. Vrayolith was quiet for a long time after he finished describing the charge. The cadets did not rush him. They had learned patience over the last few hours. They had also learned fear, though none of them would have admitted it out loud. Vrayolith could see it in the way they held themselves, shoulders tight, eyes wide, bodies still. They looked the way he had felt the first time he understood what humans really were. He told them the rest. The charge had broken the Confederacy assault. Not destroyed it, broken it. There was a difference. Vrayolith still had numbers. He still had weapons. He still had ships in orbit that could have turned the entire colony into glass. But the soldiers on the ground were no longer fighting the way they had been trained to fight. The human charge had done something to them that went deeper than casualties. It had cracked something inside their confidence. They had been told that overwhelming force wins wars. They had been taught that superior numbers and technology would always prevail. And then 500 humans, most of them civilians, had run screaming into their lines and pushed them back. The fighting after the charge was scattered and confused. Pockets of Confederacy soldiers held their positions, but coordination fell apart. The humans pressed their advantage with a fury that should not have been possible given their losses. By midday, the Confederacy forces controlled less ground than they had held at the start of the morning. Vrayolith made a decision. He called for a ceasefire. It was not a popular decision. His officers protested. Torath argued that they could still win if they committed their reserves and used orbital bombardment. Technically, he was right. Vrayolith could have ordered his ships to fire on the colony from space. The humans had no way to stop that. One concentrated bombardment, and the colony would be gone. The battle would be over in minutes. Vrayolith said he considered it. He sat in his command chair and looked at the tactical display, and thought about giving that order. He thought about the numbers, the soldiers he had lost, the resources spent, the time wasted. By pure military logic, orbital bombardment was the correct choice. The colony was a small target. The varium mines could be rebuilt. The mission could still succeed. But then, he thought about Teho carrying Yuna through the rubble. He thought about Sujin standing in front of the armored column. He thought about Unji stitching her own wounds and never stopping. He thought about Do-hyun's calm voice on the radio, talking about his cook's grandmother's stew recipe moments before leading a charge into certain death. And he thought about the song. That quiet, sad song, drifting over a group of people who knew they were living their last night. He told the cadets that he realized something in that moment. He could destroy the colony. He could kill every human on the surface. He could win the battle. But he could not win the war. Because the moment the rest of humanity learned what had happened on Korath Prime, and they would learn, because humans always remembered their dead, they would come. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. They would come from every corner of their territory, from every colony and station and ship, and they would not stop until the debt was paid. Humans did not forget. Humans did not forgive attacks on their own. Vrayolith had studied enough history by then to know this. Their own past was filled with examples. Entire civilizations that had been brought to their knees because they had harmed the wrong group of humans, and the rest had responded with a fury that burned for generations. To destroy the colony on Korath Prime would be to light a fire that the Confederacy could not put out. So Vrayolith called for a ceasefire, and Captain Do-hyun accepted. The terms were simple. The Confederacy would withdraw from Korath Prime. The human colony would remain. Mining rights would be shared through a diplomatic agreement that both sides would negotiate in good faith. Prisoners would be exchanged. The dead would be returned to their respective sides for proper burial. Vrayolith and Do-hyun met in person for the signing of the ceasefire. It was held in a small tent set up in the valley between the colony and the Confederacy landing zone. Vrayolith brought Torath and 2 guards. Do-hyun brought Sujin, just Sujin, no guards, no weapons. He walked into a tent surrounded by alien soldiers who had been trying to kill him for 3 days, and he brought one person. Vrelith said that Do-hyun was shorter than he expected. Most humans were shorter than Veloxi. He had dark eyes that were calm and steady, and his uniform was torn and stained and burned in places. Sujin stood beside him, equally battered, equally calm. They looked like they had walked through the end of the world and come out the other side, still standing. The signing took less than 10 minutes. When it was done, Do-hyun extended his hand to Vrelith. It was a human custom, a gesture of agreement. Vrelith took his hand. He said it was warm, warmer than he expected, and strong, despite how tired the human clearly was. Do-hyun said something to Vrelith before he left. He said that he was sorry for the soldiers Vrelith had lost. He said he knew they were following orders, and that they were someone's children, just like his people were. He said he hoped they would not have to do this again. Vrelith told the cadets that this was the moment that truly broke him. Not the fighting, not the charge, not the losses. It was the fact that after everything, after 3 days of blood and fire and death, this human looked at the commander of the army that had tried to destroy his home and expressed sorrow for the enemy's dead. That he still saw them as people. Vrelith withdrew from Korath Prime the next day. He filed his report with the Confederacy High Command. The report was 400 pages long. The summary was one sentence. It read, "Do not go to war with humans." The High Command did not listen. Over the next several years, there were other engagements, other battles, other commanders who thought they knew better. Every single one of them learned the same lesson that Vrelith had learned on Korath Prime. Some of them learned it at a much higher cost. Eventually, the Confederacy signed a permanent peace treaty with the humans. It was the first time in the Confederacy's history that it had offered a peace treaty to a species it outnumbered and outgunned. The treaty was still in effect. Vrelith finished his story. He looked at the cadets one by one. They were different now than they had been a few hours ago. The eagerness was gone from their faces. The excitement about their first deployment had been replaced by something heavier and more useful. Understanding. Kirath spoke first. She asked Vrelith what he wanted them to take from his story. What was the lesson? Vrelith stood up slowly. His old joints protested. His mechanical arm whirred as it adjusted to the movement. He looked at Kirath with his 3 good eyes and gave her the only answer he had. He said that if they ever found themselves facing humans, they should remember 3 things. First, humans were not strong because of their technology or their tactics. They were strong because of something inside them that no other species in the galaxy seemed to have in the same measure. They called it heart. It could not be countered, and it could not be killed. Second, humans did not fight wars the way the Confederacy did. The Confederacy fought with numbers and logic. Humans fought with everything they had and everything they were. A human soldier did not stop when it was logical to stop. A human soldier stopped when their body physically could not move anymore, and sometimes not even then. And third, the most important thing, if they ever had a choice between fighting humans and talking to them, they should always, always choose to talk, because humans were just as extraordinary at peace as they were at war. The same loyalty that made them terrifying enemies made them the most devoted friends and allies the galaxy had ever seen. The same stubbornness that kept them fighting against impossible odds was the same stubbornness that made them build colonies on harsh worlds and raise families in the void of space, and keep going when any reasonable species would have given up. Vrelith walked to the door of the room. He paused and turned back one last time. He told the cadets that the galaxy was large and full of dangerous things, but in all his years of service, in all his battles and all his travels, he had never found anything more dangerous or more wonderful than a human who had something to protect. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. The cadets sat in the flickering light of the old warship and said nothing for a very long time.